All right, let's do a quick video review on emergency procedures. This is part of the operations section of the written exam, and this is just a review of the items that might be found on this. Remember that operations, airport procedures, emergencies, and maintenance may contain up to 45% of the test questions. So if there's 60 questions, that means there may be up to 27 questions on your exam, possibly, on that general topic of operations, which includes emergency procedures. The emergencies are unexpected things and unforeseen events that can have serious consequences for an unprepared remote pilot. So the FAA wants to some assurance that you at least have a rough idea of how to meet emergencies and resolve the issue, how to reduce the risk involved, because remember, there's always a risk. With aviation, there's always a risk. The only way to be perfectly safe is to never fly your drone. So there's always some kind of risk. We want to reduce the possibility or reduce the risk as much as possible. And we want to be able to at least be thoughtful about how we might respond to an emergency. So, of course, remote pilot is totally the one, the PIC is the one responsible for the safe operation of your small UA at all times. And obviously the pre-flight, you have to make sure that it's in a safe condition before you even fly, and so that there may not possibly arise a hazard to persons or property. You have to brief your crew members as well. Pre-flight inspection is required. If anything's not quite right, it must be fixed before you take off. If there's not a manufacturer's checklist, which most of the drones that we've been flying at the school here don't have a manufacturer's checklist, we should be developing our own checklist that will provide enough information to make sure the aircraft is in a safe operation, a safe condition to operate. Remember, of course, that the rule says that if you do have an in-flight emergency, the pilot may take any action to ensure there's not a hazard to other people or property, including breaking one of the other regulations. May have to climb above 400 feet above ground level to maneuver to a safe landing area, perhaps. And of course, the report is only if requested must you fill out a report. Don't fill it out unless the FAA ask you to, of course. So crew members, if you have crew members, all of the crew members involved must be briefed on the flight plan and the planned emergency procedure for the flight. Briefing could be given to visual observers as well, or any other non-certified person that was allowed to manipulate the flight controls. So there's the general idea of that. So the written test is developed so that the FAA can have some assurance that you will know these items. And here are the items. Emergency planning and communication. What we talked about there, communicating with all of the crew members about the possible hazards, and also what might need to be done if there becomes a hazardous situation. What are your plans as a pilot command? What are your plans if you have a battery fire or one of the motors stop working and it crashes into, that kind of thing. So we need to be aware of that. The hazardous lithium batteries are required. There'll be test questions on how do you transport lithium batteries. Remember that you're not allowed to carry hazmat on your drone, with the exception, of course, lithium batteries are hazardous material. You're allowed to carry hazardous material if it's the primary power source for your drone. You can't strap a spare battery on the side of your drone and fly. That's now become hazardous material. Also, we've talked about if you're going to fly an airline flight or in an airplane, a manned aircraft, that it's not safe to have that hidden away in the cargo compartment, because if there's burst into flames, there's no way to put the fire out. You're not even aware of the fire. I think it was Air Florida had a crash, and it was not a lithium battery, but there's been fires in cargo compartments before caused by lithium batteries, so the FAA is very cautious about that. So if you're going to travel, you have to carry it in your person or ship it somehow. If you ship them, you need to tell the shipper that you are including lithium batteries in the package. All right. Hazards of lithium batteries, have to understand how to charge it safely, Remember, you don't stick it in your bedroom closet underneath your dirty socks. Okay, it's more when it's charging, it warms up, and if it starts a leak, it starts burning very quickly. So you don't really want to have it, probably not even charge it in your home. You probably don't want to leave it overnight in a place where it might start a fire. The drone area here is pretty safe because we've got cement blocks and all that stuff, but still, we don't leave it overnight charging. Safe usage of batteries, that would include questions about when they expire, how often you can charge them, how long do they last. Of course, we refer to the manufacturer's instructions on those kind of questions. And D, of course, the risk of fires, right? The possibility that any damaged or swollen battery is at risk for a fire. They're not going to ask you all the technical questions that we covered before, but just the fact that you don't want to use a battery that's swelling up a little bit, or unusually hot, or leaking, or punctured, worse yet. Any of those things are big warning signs, and that's the kind of question you'll receive on this. So hazardous lithium batteries are definitely a concern. They'll ask questions about the loss of aircraft control link and a flyaway. The difference between the two, loss of aircraft control link simply means that your control unit is no longer connected. Of course, the first thing you do when you take off and hover is you check to make sure it's connected. But it's possible that it might lose control link. You need to understand that, again, when that happens, there should be some kind of a procedure for that drone to return home or to hover or to land wherever it is. I mean, you have that selection. In most of these drones, you can select which one of those you want it to do. You need to understand that. And knowing that, and knowing where you're going to be flying, you make those choices. If you're going to be flying indoors, you probably just want the drone to hover if you lose control link between the two, and then you can walk over there and grab it or get close enough to regain control. But if you're flying over the top of trees, you may not want that to happen if you can't find it. You should always have it in sight. It's also possible to have it land wherever it is. If you're flying over the water, that would be a bad idea. Okay, you get the idea. But there's a difference between that and a flyaway. A flyaway is when the drone just disappears. It just goes off and does its own thing. That implies the loss of aircraft control link, but the drone doesn't respond as it ought to with some kind of automatic return, autonomous return to home, or autonomously hover or autonomously land. Flyaway is an emergency. Loss of aircraft control link, not necessarily. A flyaway is an emergency. Loss of GPS signal. Loss of GPS signal, the potential consequences, you need to understand that as well. It's not going to maintain geographical position as well. When we're indoors, we don't get reliable GPS signals. We turn it off and we notice the drone will wander a little bit. Sort of like the Telluride that we use that doesn't have GPS, it could wander quite a bit. So you have to be paying attention. Whereas if you have a good, solid GPS link, the drone stays almost exactly where you leave it. If the drone starts going somewhere and you just let go of the controls, it'll just stop right there if it has a good GPS link. And also with a good GPS link, it will return to home, fairly close to where your home really is, wherever your home point is. So the consequences of not having a good signal is it won't return home to the very precisely. It might not return home at all, and it would drift with a strong wind, or possibly, or other situations. So we check, when we take off, we check to see that it's got good GPS signal, reliable signal. 4 satellites at least, but recommended 6. Frequency spectrum and associated limitations. Now we're talking about the fact that if you had like 25 drones all at the same time in a close proximity, it's possible that there may be some frequency interference between controllers. That's possible. Flying around cell phone towers or microwave towers, possibly to have issues with that as well. So, there are, in most of these drones, you can select one of them. Yeah, this is a way to select whatever frequency band that you're on so that you don't have interference. Not many questions on that, though. Operations over people. We have talked about that in Launchpad number 1. We pretty extensively talked about that. And on this module, Launchpad 8, there is a reference document from the FAA that describes it's called FAA briefing paper on the operations over people, because this is a fairly new regulation. It'd be really helpful if you read that through. It's a very simple paper, only 6-7 pages, not fine print. It's all, basically written for pilots. Okay, so it's pretty simple, and we've covered it before, so I'm not going to make a big deal about it here. But there's questions about operations over people, and you can go back to Launchpad number 1 and look at the whole video. I think that's about a 30-minute video that talks about that as well, if you're a little bit hazy about this. Okay, we got operations at night. Remember now that there are still some questions on the twilight flight, 30 minutes after official sunset and 30 minutes before official sunrise. You must have some kind of anti-collision light that's visible for 3 miles. But now we do have permission to operate at night as well, and there is, you just be aware of that. You still have to have anti-collision lights visible for 3 miles. So that about covers it. This is the whole of this emergency section, emergency planning and communication. And we talked about the hazards of lithium batteries, transportation, safe charging, safe using, risks of fires. Then we talked about loss of aircraft control link and flyaways, the loss of GPS signal and potential consequences, frequency spectrums and associated limitations, operation over people, and operations at night. So those are the things that might be included in the emergency procedure section of the test. So thank you for your attention. Again, remember, you're free to call or text or communicate with me somehow if you have any questions about this. But the Remote Pilot Study Guide published by the FAA is still a good source of information. It's all pretty clear. How many pages is it? I've got it right here, and it's freely downloadable. I printed one out just for grins, and it says 80 pages, and a bunch of them are pictures, so it's not all text. And so all of the information I've given you here is in the guide. Anyway, all right, thank you.